EU's chief negotiator says there still hasn't been sufficient progress over Brexit to proceed to discussions about Britain's future relationship with the EU. Michel Barnier said that the role of the European Court of Justice on the issue of citizens' rights remained a stumbling block.
And the two sides still haven't agreed the so-called divorce bill, but he welcomed a new dynamic in the wake of the Theresa May speech in Florence, and the Brexit Secretary David Davis said the two sides were now making headway.
Let's go live to Sky's Europe correspondent Michelle Clifford, who's in Brussels. Michelle, good afternoon to you. Differing opinions from the two key protagonists. David Davis broadly positive in his outlook, Michel Barnier a bit more circumspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got that very clearly. David Davis, I think, had to be positive after Theresa May's speech. And there was an acknowledgement from Michel Barnier that there was a better dynamic in the talks after what he had called a constructive speech by Theresa May. But if you look at the key issues, there still are, as Mr Barnier put it, major stumbling blocks on the issue, for example, of the European Court of Justice and its jurisdiction over the rights of EU citizens. No further forward. Certainly Britain, we were told today, has said it will incorporate all the rights of EU citizens into British law, but it insists still that the ECJ should have absolutely no jurisdiction over those rights. On the issue of the financial settlement, well, they are talking. Certainly Mr Barnier said there was a technical report on that. It is helpful, but there hasn't been any agreement on exactly what Britain is going to pay, and we got a real sense that there was still a great deal of divergence between what the UK was offering and what the EU members want. And on that issue of a transition period, we heard Theresa May last week in Florence talking about this 2-year transition period. Now, what Britain wants at the moment is for it to be allowed to discuss the nature of the transition, but the EU, it seems, is still sticking to the position that they're not going to talk about that until there is sufficient progress. And we heard Michel Barnier saying that there has been progress in some areas, on others we are far apart, but basically it's been constructive, but there is no sufficient progress. And Colin, that means next week, when the European Parliament is due to vote on whether sufficient progress has been achieved, I think we know the answer. We know what that vote is going to say. The answer is going to be no. I think more critically, at the end of this month, there is a European Council summit. There was meant to be a discernment of sufficient progress. What Mr Barnier is going to be saying to those 27 members, I don't detect it yet. There's a lot more work to be done. So I think even by the end of the month, that determination will be no, the progress hasn't been made. So I think the sense from both men today is that the talks were framed in a better way, but on the critical issues which will allow the EU 27 to say we've moved forward in a way that we're satisfied with, it simply isn't there at the moment.
Let's just get a flavour of what both of them had to say in their own words now.
The only way to reach sufficient progress is that all commitments undertaken at 28 are honoured at 28. We have had a constructive week, yes, but we are not yet there in terms of achieving sufficient progress. Further work is needed in the coming weeks and coming months.
And while inevitably this requires further discussion, I believe that thanks to the constructive and determined manner in which both sides have conducted these negotiations, we're making decisive steps forward. After 4 rounds, when I look across the full range of issues to do with our withdrawal from the EU, I'm clear we've made considerable progress on the issues that matter: increasing certainty for citizens and businesses, providing reassurance to our EU partners in regards to our mutual financial obligations, and agreeing to some of the key principles in relation to issues arising for Northern Ireland and Ireland.
Michelle, David Davis spelled it out line by line there, didn't he, on those 3 key areas: the divorce bill, mutual rights for citizens, Northern Ireland. There's progress being made, but Barnier stressing that stumbling block, and in the minds of many observers, I'm sure you've got something to say about it yourself, the European Court of Justice is the potential tiger trap.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to see how you get over that particular issue, because there doesn't seem to be any sense of the EU 27 budging on that. Certainly there have been suggestions and ideas this week from experts in Britain about setting up an alternative court, so the ECJ and a British court can look into disputes, but it's just not something that the EU 27 want to budge on. So you wonder how you can get past that. And added to that, as I mentioned, there are still issues on the whole issue of European citizens' rights, citizens in Britain, and on the financial bill. What we've seen in the course of the last week is ministers, including David Davis, the International Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, going out unilaterally across Europe, meeting with their counterparts in other EU countries. Some people suggest that's a strategy of divide and conquer, that they're trying to go over the heads of Michel Barnier and talk directly to the leaders and foreign ministers in those countries. Britain would deny that. They're saying that the mission this week by those three is simply to explain, if there was any doubt, exactly what Theresa May meant in her speech. But there is still a great, I think, deal of suspicion amongst the EU 27 members about what exactly is going on with those trips. So, as I said, I think there was a sense that the talks themselves were a little better. In terms of progress on substantive issues, it isn't there yet.